A speed square has become a staple in construction and any handyman's toolbox. Once you've mastered the versatility of a speed square, you'll impress anyone with just how much you can do with it. In this video, we'll cover what everything on a speed square means, what it's used for, and how you can get more out of your speed square. The most common use for a speed square is making a straight line perpendicular to a surface. This flat surface on a speed square is known as the lip. We place the lip flush against our material, then you can mark a line on the edge of your speed square, giving you a perfect 90-degree angle. The other end of the square could also be used to mark a 45-degree angle. A speed square can mark any angle you want, also acting as an angle finder or protractor. Most speed squares will say pivot at the corner. This is the point at which you pivot the tool to find the desired angle and mark. Again, you place the lip against your material, then you begin to pivot the square at that point. Using the other end of the material as the indicator for the angle, let's say for example, you want a 20-degree angle, you pivot the square until you reach 20 degrees on your material edge. Then we can draw a line from our pivot point across the side to make a 20-degree angle. In this manner, we can mark any angle we want, 35, 45, 53 degrees, and so on. In combination with a level, we can find the angle of something relative to level. To do this, we place the level on the lip, or in other words, the flat surface of the speed square. Then we place the pivot point against the material we're trying to find the angle of and level the square. We can then use the angle guide to determine the angle of the material relative to level. But that's not all. In the absence of level, we could also use a plumb weight instead. Now before we continue, it's important to know what plumb is. Most of us know that level means perfectly horizontal relative to Earth's gravity. Plumb is simply perfectly perpendicular to Earth's gravity. And with that in mind, we can continue. So a square and a plumb line allows for multiple functions, including leveling the square so you don't need a level at all. If you place the plumb line hanging from the pivot point against the straight edge of your square, you'll get a makeshift level against the lip of the square. This allows for the same function as the bubble level, allowing you to find the angle of any material relative to level. Just make sure the line is hanging from the lip and not being pushed or caught on any part of the square. Now we've already seen how we could level our square with a plumb line, but we can do even more with this combination. Using the diagonal line of our speed square as opposed to the straight edge allows us additional functions. To make a level line, we place our line on the pivot again and align it with 45 degrees. We then have a perfect line across the diagonal edge of our square. A final important thing to take into consideration when using a plumb line like this is that the line should be read on the thin edge facing the lip, not the center of the line or the outer edge. This is because the line sits exactly on pivot, giving an excess of thickness outwards of the thickness of the line. Most speed squares have a scribe feature. This will be in the form of notches perpendicular to the lip of the square. To use this, you place the lip of the square on the material, then place the pencil in the notch and slide the square across the material, ensuring it does not come off of the material. In this case, our scribe starts at 1 inch and increases in 1/4 inch increments. Other squares will have more or less scribe points. This is a useful feature for ripping boards, making reference lines, measuring, or cutting. Speed squares are also known as rafter squares, and for non-builders, these are the least known features. Rafters are the sloped structural members of a roof, so originally the design of this tool was to measure and cut rafters. And this is where we use the common values and hips and valleys. These values on the speed square refer to pitch. Pitch in this case is the height relative to the run, or horizontal length, of 12 inches. So a 6-inch pitch is the diagonal line between 12 inches in length and 6 inches in height. This can be calculated when building, but is usually provided by the architectural plans. Once we know our pitch, we can cut our rafters. Let's keep 6 as an example. We can use our speed square in the same fashion as an angle finder, placing the lip against the material and turning the square on the pivot point. Once the number 6 lines up with the material, we can mark the straight edge of the square. This gives us our plumb line. If we remember what plumb means, we just plumb this line up either with a weight or a level. And with this, we know that our material has a 6/12 pitch relative to level. Now this is the start of our rafter. We cut at this line and we get what's known as the plumb cut. This will sit against what's known as the ridge board. But of course, that's not all the components of a rafter. The next component is cutting what's known as the bird's mouth. To do so, we calculate the rafter length, though that's a topic for another video. Once we know our length, we measure down and make another 6/12 pitch plumb mark. Now this plumb mark will not be cut through all the way because this gets what's known as the bird's mouth. Now there's different ways of measuring this, but again, that's a topic for another video. Now most squares will have this line on the tip of it. This allows us to make straight 45-degree angles in the middle of materials. And in this case, it's very useful to mark our bird's mouth. We can mark this, and this is what we're going to cut out to make the bird's mouth. And when building a house, this should align perfectly plumb and level with our wall frames. Now, all of this is rafter specific, but this can be used not only for rafters, but also for joining or aligning any material, whether it be wood, metal, plastic, tiles, glass, or any number of joints and angles, especially large pieces. The hip and valley angles are mostly just used for making rafters. Hips and valleys are the roof members that are between opposing rafters. This could either be the outside, known as hips, or the inside, known as valleys. Now, we cannot use the same pitch because when something is placed diagonally, it reduces its height. Or in other words, it travels less distance between perpendicular points. So this changes our pitch because the rafter has to travel a further distance. However, on our speed square, they've done the work for us and placed the new correct plumb cuts on the hips and valley marks of our speed square. Let's cut a hip to solidify what it is that this helps us do. We have to calculate rafter length again, and rafter drop, height above plate, and height below plate. But all of this is, again, a topic for another video. Once we're ready to cut our plumb line, we'll use the 6 pitch on the hip and valley as opposed to the common. We'll continue to use the angle on the hip side for the bird's mouth and the tail. On the plumb cut, I've made 3 marks, and this is because we need to cut a 45-degree angle for our rafter to fit into the corners. Our hip fits right into place because we used our hip and valley's pitch mark. Had we used our common marks, the rafter would not fit. Speed squares are great for making repetitive marks, and a lot of speed squares will even have predetermined marks to help speed up this process even more. In this case, we have an arrow at 1.5 inches. This is the thickness of a 2x4, which is commonly used for framing in the United States. So we can use this mark to quickly mark the position of our rafters and square it up with the plate. Assuming the square has not been damaged, it should have a perfect 90-degree angle. And so far we've used this to mark, but it could also be extremely useful for checking 90-degree angles, that be on tools or material. We could check the square, for example, on our circular saw, ensuring that the shoe or flat side is 90 degrees to the blade. And this can be used for jigsaws, table saws, and all sorts of cutting tools. And it could also be used to check joined materials and make sure they are sitting at 90 degrees to each other. In honor of this video, we've designed our own workwear, and we put serious thought and care into making something worthy of our reputation. We've tested the competition to find the best quality and most durable t-shirt possible. So this shirt isn't just looks. It's 100% cotton, heavyweight knit, double needle, and high density stitching. This t-shirt is ready for any task with ultimate durability, comfort, and quality. Each t-shirt sold helps us continue to create more content. And it's the best way to support the channel and help us continue to invest in making the best content possible.